Forward Operating Base Nightingale was a place people were sent to be forgotten. It clung to a dusty ridge in a valley the locals called the Cauldron of Ghosts, a name earned through generations of failed campaigns and sudden, brutal ambushes. It was a dumping ground for misfit equipment and, more often than not, misfit personnel. The arrival of Chief Warrant Officer 4 Elena Rostova was barely a ripple in the stagnant pond of the base's daily routine. She was a ghost herself, a name on a personnel file transferred into a nondescript role overseeing logistical supply chains, a job usually given to a captain on their way out or a warrant officer counting the days to retirement. The SEAL team operating out of the FOB, a hardened unit designated Trident, was deep in the valley, hunting a high-value target. Their mission was the only thing that gave Nightingale a pulse. In the command tent, Colonel Thorne monitored their progress, the tension a low hum beneath the crackle of the radio. He didn't know that the linchpin of their survival was not the air support on standby or the drone circling overhead, but a woman he had dismissed that morning, a woman who was at that very moment watching the distant hills with an unnerving stillness, her presence an unwritten variable in his rigid tactical equation. The battle was coming, and the SEALs were walking right into its teeth. The only question was whether their unseen guardian, the forgotten logistician, would reveal her hand. Elena's transfer had been an anomaly, a square peg hammered into a round hole. She stepped off the C-130 with 2 bags, a standard duffel and a long, heavy-duty Pelican case that required 2 grumbling airmen to unload. It bore no markings, but its weight and shape suggested something far more specialized than survey equipment. Specialist Miller, a young soldier whose primary duty seemed to be avoiding the sergeant major's gaze, was assigned to escort her. He saw a woman in her late 30s, her face a roadmap of sun and hard seasons, her graying hair pulled back in a severe, disciplined bun. Her eyes, a pale, piercing blue, missed nothing. They swept the perimeter, the distant ridgelines, and the disposition of the guard towers with a slow, methodical assessment that made him feel intensely scrutinized. She moved with an economy of motion, each step placed with quiet purpose, a stark contrast to the bored, shuffling gait of the other soldiers. She was a creature of profound stillness in a place defined by anxious energy. Her presence was a low, resonant note in the background noise of the base, one most failed to hear, but those who did felt an inexplicable shift in the atmosphere. She was assigned a small, prefabricated hut at the edge of the compound, a place to store her files and her secrets. Colonel Marcus Thorne had built his career on regulations. His uniform was immaculate, his office Spartan, his worldview defined by the clear, hierarchical lines of the United States Army. He saw Elena Rostova's file on his desk and frowned. Chief Warrant Officer 4, a rank that bespoke immense technical expertise, assigned to inventory management. The file was thin, suspiciously so. There were commendations, but the descriptions were redacted into meaningless blocks of black ink. Her previous assignment was listed simply as Special Projects Command, a bureaucratic black hole. He summoned her to his office the first morning. She stood before his desk, perfectly at ease, her hands clasped loosely behind her back. Chief Rostova, Thorne began, his tone clipped and dismissive. He didn't offer her a seat. Your file is unusual. Your assignment here is logistics, paperwork, container tracking. Are you clear on that? His question was a challenge, a subtle accusation that she was something other than what she appeared to be. Perfectly, sir, Elena replied, her voice calm and even, betraying no emotion. Thorne leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. This is an active combat zone, Chief. We have a Tier 1 asset conducting operations from this FOB. The last thing I need is a loose cannon, someone with a history they can't talk about, getting ideas. Your job is to stay in your lane. Count the widgets, sign the forms, and stay out of my TOC. Am I making myself clear? The condescension was thick, a deliberate tool to put her in her place. He saw a problem to be managed, not an asset to be utilized. Elena's gaze did not waver. Crystal clear, Colonel. She held his stare for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. A silent contest of wills he didn't even know he was losing. Then she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, turned, and walked out, leaving Thorn with the unsettling feeling that he had just issued a pointless order to a tide that had no intention of obeying. Elena spent less than an hour in the windowless supply office. She organized the pending requisitions with swift efficiency, her mind processing the data while her instincts were screaming to be outside. The real work, the work she was born for, was not in tracking ammunition, but in understanding its trajectory. She found what she was looking for on the western edge of the FOB. A derelict observation post, little more than a crumbling sandbag nest on a small rise that offered a commanding view of the entire valley, especially the treacherous network of ravines and ridges known as the Ghost Hills. It was the perfect perch. She spent the next 2 days there during her off hours, a solitary figure against the skyline. She unpacked the Pelican case, revealing not survey equipment, but a heavily customized rifle. It was a 338 Lapua Magnum, its barrel thick and fluted, the stock a molded composite of carbon fiber, the optics a piece of German glass worth more than Miller's college tuition. She didn't fire it. She simply observed. With a small Kestrel weather meter and a worn leather-bound notebook, she built a portrait of the valley's atmosphere. She charted the subtle shifts in wind that snaked through the canyons, the way the morning sun created a deceptive mirage that could bend light and throw a projectile off by meters at distance. She noted the flight patterns of birds, the dust devils that signaled thermal updrafts. Specialist Miller, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and a vague sense of duty, brought her a canteen of water. He watched as she meticulously cleaned the rifle's bolt, her hands moving with the practiced grace of a surgeon. "What are you doing, ma'am?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elena glanced up, her eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "Learning the wind," she said, her voice quiet. "Out here, the wind is a river. You can't see it, but it has currents, eddies. You have to learn to read it before you can cross it." She was not just observing. She was rehearsing. She was mapping every potential ambush site, every sniper's hide, every escape route. She was laying a grid of lethal mathematics over a landscape of chaos, waiting for an equation that needed solving. The crisis arrived with a burst of static over the command net. The voice of the SEAL team leader, call sign Ghost, was strained, breathless. "Contact heavy. We are pinned down in the basin. Grid 47 Charlie. Multiple positions, RPGs and heavy machine guns. 2 wounded." In the Tactical Operations Center, the comm facade shattered. Colonel Thorne stood rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of a console. On the main screen, a drone feed showed a shaky, smoke-obscured view of the firefight. Green tracer rounds from the SEALs' rifles were answered by thick, angry streams of red from enemy positions. An explosion rocked the camera as an RPG slammed into the rock formation the SEALs were using for cover. "Where is our air support?" Thorne barked at the Air Force liaison. 20 minutes out, sir." They were diverted for a troops in contact further east. 20 minutes was an eternity. The SEALs had less than 5. The medic was trying to work on a man with a severe leg wound, but a persistent enemy sniper was kicking up dust and rock chips inches from his head, keeping him suppressed. The team was trapped in a classic L-shaped ambush, caught in a crossfire from a DSHK heavy machine gun on a ridge to their front and the sniper on their flank. Panic began to curdle the air in the TOC. The comms tech relayed another message from Ghost, his voice grim. "We can't suppress the DSHK. It's tearing our cover apart. We are taking effective fire and cannot maneuver. Be advised, we are in danger of being overrun." Thorne stared at the screen, a muscle twitching in his jaw. His men, the best of the best, were being slaughtered, and he was 1,000 miles away, a helpless spectator watching shadows dance on a screen. Elena heard the frantic radio traffic on the small handheld she kept with her. She didn't need to hear the coordinates. She had been watching the patrol's progress for the last hour, a knot of unease tightening in her stomach as they moved deeper into the very basin she had marked in her notebook with a skull and crossbones. She was already in her perch, the big rifle resting solidly on its bipod. The worn leather stock settled perfectly into the cup of her shoulder. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for an order. To do so would be to waste lives. She was an instrument of immediate, violent intervention, and the moment for her use was now. Her world shrank to the circular image in her scope. The heat mirage was a shimmering curtain, but she had practiced reading its distortions for 2 days. She found the source of the greatest danger first. The DSHK, a monstrous Soviet-era machine gun, spitting fire and lead from a fortified nest of rocks and sandbags 1570 meters away. Her mind was a cold, clear calculator. Distance: 1570 m. Wind: 7 miles per hour. Full value, from her left. Temperature: 98 degrees. She spun the elevation turret on her scope with an audible click, 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 dialing in the precise adjustment from her data book. She held for windage, aiming not at the gunner, but at a point in the empty air to his left. She controlled her breathing, exhaling slowly, finding the natural respiratory pause. The world went silent. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a powerful, controlled recoil. For a second, nothing. Then, through the scope, the DSHK gunner's head vanished in a pink mist. The gun fell silent. Before anyone in the TOC could even register what had happened, Elena was already working the bolt, the spent brass casing ejecting in a graceful arc. Her eyes scanned and found the second target, the RPG gunner preparing to fire another rocket. The range was slightly different. Quick adjustment. Breathe. Squeeze. The second shot was away. The RPG team disappeared in the premature detonation of their own weapon. Her gaze shifted again, finding the glint of the sniper's scope that was harassing the medic. This was a harder shot, a smaller target. She took an extra second, settled the crosshairs. Breathe. Squeeze. The glint vanished. 3 shots. 3 threats neutralized in under 30 seconds. The tide of the battle had turned. Elena calmly folded the bipod, slid the rifle back into its case, and began her walk back to the compound, just another logistician finishing her day. The silence of the DSHK was so sudden and absolute that, for a moment, everyone in the TOC thought their audio feed had cut out. Then the drone camera repositioning zoomed in on the enemy machine gun nest. The gunner was slumped over his weapon, motionless. A second later, the RPG position erupted in a ball of flame. What the hell was that? Thorne demanded, his voice a mixture of confusion and hope. Did Trident have a sniper we weren't tracking? The comms tech, a young sergeant with wide eyes, was frantically running diagnostics. Negative, sir. All Trident assets are accounted for. They're as confused as we are. Ghost's voice came back over the radio, the panic replaced by stunned disbelief. TOC, be advised. We just had some divine intervention. Heavy gun and RPG team are down. We don't know from where. The sergeant's fingers flew across his keyboard, triangulating the acoustic sensors scattered throughout the valley. A map appeared on the secondary screen, showing the location of the SEALs and the now silent enemy positions. 3 thin lines appeared on the map, tracing the ballistic trajectory of the shots. They all originated from the same point inside the wire, a point on the western perimeter of FOB Nightingale. Sir, the sergeant said, his voice trembling slightly as he pointed at the screen. The firing solution. It's impossible. The shots came from here. From the old OP on the West Ridge. Colonel Thorne stared at the lines on the map. His mind raced back to his conversation that morning, to the quiet, unnerving woman with the redacted file and the heavy Pelican case. He remembered his dismissive words, his condescending tone. A cold wave of realization washed over him. He strode to the window of the TOC, his binoculars already in hand, and focused on the West Ridge. He saw a lone figure walking calmly back toward the main compound, a long case held in one hand. His dismissal curdled into a potent cocktail of shock, embarrassment, and a dawning, electrifying curiosity. He had not been talking to a paper pusher. He had been talking to a phantom. The SEALs had exploited the sudden chaos. With the primary threats eliminated, they counterattacked, securing their wounded and beginning a fighting withdrawal. But the battle was not over. The enemy commander, a ruthless warlord known only as the Jackal, had been personally overseeing the ambush. The drone, now able to maneuver freely, spotted him. He and his personal guard were scrambling aboard a modified Toyota Hilux, a technical armed with a smaller machine gun, attempting to flee through a narrow canyon pass at the northern edge of the basin. "We have a positive ID on the HVT," the intelligence officer announced. "He's escaping in a technical heading north. He'll be out of range in 2 minutes." This was the entire purpose of the mission. Losing him now would be a catastrophic failure. "Air support is still 10 minutes out," Thorne stated, the frustration evident in his voice. "We can't stop him then." An idea, born of desperation and his newfound discovery, took hold. He grabbed the microphone for the base-wide tactical net. He didn't know if she was listening, or if she would even respond. "Rostova," he said, his voice stripped of all its earlier arrogance, now purely professional. "This is Colonel Thorne. Do you have a comms unit?" A moment of silence, then a calm, clear voice answered, as if she were standing right next to him. "I read you, Colonel." Thorne took a breath. "Do you have eyes on a technical, moving north through the Anvil Pass?" Another brief pause. Elena was already back in her perch, the rifle reassembled, her scope tracking the speeding vehicle. The distance was even greater now, nearly 1,800 meters, and the target was moving. "Affirmative, Colonel. I have the target." Thorne's next words were not an order, but a plea. "Can you stop it?" The question hung in the air of the TOC. Every officer turned to stare at the radio speaker, waiting for the Phantom's reply. The voice that came back was devoid of ego or bravado, a simple statement of fact. "The shot is difficult, but I can take it." Thorne keyed the mic one last time. "Send it." The world through Elena's scope was a bucking, weaving blur of brown and tan. The technical bounced over the rocky terrain of the canyon floor, kicking up a plume of dust. Hitting a man at this range was hard. Hitting a specific part of a moving vehicle was next to impossible. But Elena wasn't aiming for a man. She wasn't even aiming for the tires. She was aiming for the engine block, a dense, solid mass of steel that would, if struck by a 338 caliber armor-piercing round, turn the vehicle into a useless cage. She factored in the vehicle's speed, the angle of the canyon, the fickle wind that swirled between the rock walls. She had to lead the target, firing at a point in space where the truck would be in 1.5 seconds. It was a shot that relied as much on instinct as it did on mathematics. She took a deep, calming breath, let half of it out, and felt the familiar stillness settle over her. She pressed the trigger. The shot was an act of faith. Back in the TOC, they watched the drone feed with bated breath. For a heart-stopping second, it looked like she had missed. The bullet seemed to pass harmlessly behind the truck. But Elena hadn't missed. The round, traveling at nearly 3 times the speed of sound, slammed into the front grille, tore through the radiator, and shattered the engine block. White smoke and steam erupted from under the hood. The truck swerved violently, its momentum carrying it into the canyon wall with a bone-jarring crash. It was disabled, its occupants trapped. The SEALs, now moving to intercept, had their prize. A collective sigh of relief and awe filled the TOC. On the radio, Ghost's voice was filled with a reverence that bordered on worship. "TOC, who is your angel on the ridge? I've never seen shooting like that. We owe them our lives." Colonel Thorne, humbled and deeply shaken, walked over to the intelligence officer's station. "Pull up Chief Rostova's full file," he commanded. "All of it. Level 5 clearance," the officer typed in the override codes. The redacted blocks on the screen dissolved, revealing a service record that made the blood run cold. Mission after mission with units whose names were spoken only in whispers. A list of commendations for valor so extreme they bordered on mythological. And at the top of the file, next to her name, was a single word. Her operational call sign. Thorne picked up the microphone, his hand steady now. "Trident, your support today was Chief Warrant Officer for Elena Rostova." He paused, letting the name sink in. "Some of you may have known her by a different name. Valkyrie." A stunned silence fell over the radio net. Then Ghost's voice, choked with emotion, broke the quiet. "Valkyrie? Elena? My God. We thought you were Kia in the Zagros Mountains. The SEAL team leader, the hardened warrior known as Ghost, was a young operator named David Nash. He had been the sole survivor of a compromised mission years ago, a mission from which Elena Rostova had been declared killed in action after single-handedly holding off an enemy force to allow his escape. The Ghost on the radio had just been saved by a ghost from his past. The return of Trident Team to FOB Nightingale was a somber, triumphant affair. They were battered, bruised, and carrying one of their own on a stretcher, but they were alive and they had the Jackal in custody. The entire command staff, including Colonel Thorne, was waiting on the tarmac as the helicopters landed. As the SEALs disembarked, their faces grim with exhaustion and smeared with grime, Elena Rostova walked down from the western ridge, her rifle case in her hand. Her path intersected with thorns. The usual base traffic had stopped. Soldiers paused their work, turning to watch the silent drama unfold. Thorne, a man who had not shown an ounce of deference to the warrant officer 24 hours earlier, stopped directly in front of her. He looked at the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated, seeing not a logistical clerk, but a legend in the flesh. Without a word, he drew himself up to his full height and rendered a salute. It was sharp, precise, and loaded with a weight of apology and profound respect that no words could convey. It was a gesture not required by protocol, a public admission of his error and her immense value. Elena did not salute back. She simply met his gaze and gave a slow, formal nod of acknowledgement, her expression unreadable but for the faintest hint of something other than ice in her pale blue eyes. The moment was broken by the approach of the SEALs. Their leader, Ghost David Nash, stopped before her. He looked older than he had in the Zagros Mountains, the years of war etched onto his face. There were no grand speeches, no tearful reunions. He simply reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of immense gratitude and shared history. The other SEALs, some of the most dangerous men on the planet, formed a loose semicircle around her. They didn't speak. They just looked at her, their eyes conveying a message of awe and unbreakable brotherhood. Respect had been earned not with words, but with deeds. As dusk settled over the valley, casting long shadows from the jagged peaks, a buzz of myth and rumor spread through FOB Nightingale. The quiet logistics officer was gone, replaced by the legend of Valkyrie, the ghost sniper who had saved Trident Team from the brink of annihilation. Soldiers spoke her name in hushed, reverent tones in the mess hall and the makeshift gym. But Elena was not there to hear it. She was back in her perch on the western ridge, the place that was now unofficially hers. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. She sat with her rifle laid across her lap on a cleaning mat, meticulously swabbing the barrel, wiping down the bolt, and oiling each moving part with a surgeon's care. The ritual was as much a part of her process as pulling the trigger. It was a way of centering herself, of honoring the tool of her unique and terrible craft. Beside her, on a flat rock, sat a single gleaming brass shell casing, the one from the first shot that had silenced the DSHK. It was her only souvenir, a small, tangible piece of the day's violent work. She looked out over the cauldron of ghosts, the landscape no longer just a tactical problem but a territory under her protection. The dismissal and the condescension she had faced were distant echoes, faded by the thunder of her actions. She had sought no recognition, but she had earned a quiet, unshakable reverence that was more valuable than any medal. Colonel Thorne had reassigned her. Her new duty title listed simply as Overwatch. She was no longer a forgotten woman in a forgotten place. She was the guardian on the ridge, a silent Valkyrie watching over the valley, her purpose restored, her dignity intact, a quiet sentinel whose legend was now etched into the very stones of FOB Nightingale.